Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is the Cult Kid Podcast. One of the things I've realized lately, and full disclosure, this episode is chock full of realizations. But to start with, I've been saying that these are conversations with myself, and I can't say that. The conversation that I have with myself happens before I get to the podcast. And what I'm really doing is talking to you. I'm expressing to you something I've learned, these realizations, something, how I feel about something. And that created a disconnect with what was really going on here. And I'll just say I am not happy at all with my last episode for several reasons. It could have been thought out better. It was, and what bothered me the most was that it was purposely contentious and a bit pretentious. My attitude was not an attitude that I'm proud of. And I think it's because there's a disconnect with the idea that I'm talking to somebody and thinking that, oh, this is just me ranting and having a conversation with myself. I don't have to be totally accountable or responsible for what I say and how I say it. It's been bothering me for ever since I posted it. There was something about it that I just couldn't put my finger on. To be honest with you, I didn't want to think about it, and I pushed it down. I shoved it to the side. And this past week or 2 weeks, I've noticed how I've slowly been. I was becoming more and more tired. My attitude at work was not the best. It culminated all yesterday into this bubbling feeling of embarrassment, and I couldn't even tell myself why I was embarrassed. And so I had a very serious conversation with myself and realized that for whatever reason, I was purposely being contentious, instigating in the way that I was talking about these things that I had learned and realized from somebody who is quite controversial. And I think that is why there's something, and I was just having a conversation with my father about this, but there's a part of me that likes controversy. And I haven't been able to put my finger on it exactly why. I like controversy. I like having conversations about controversial things. I like the idea of alternating concepts and differentiating ideologies and figuring out what they mean to different people. And I don't, and I've always had this knack. I've always been this way to a degree. And this is the other thing. This is one of the other things that I was reminded about myself is even as a kid, I remember I was friends with the friend groups that hated each other or didn't get along with each other. I was always able to be a part of conflicting groups. I've always been able to very easily see and understand both sides of an argument. I'm very empathetic in the sense that I can quite easily put myself in someone else's shoes. And I'm empathic in the sense that I can feel what somebody else feels in certain situations. And it's just a part of who I am. And I've had to, back in the day when I didn't even know an empath was a thing, when I didn't understand much about my own personality and psychology, it was something that brought me a lot of trouble because I was able to I didn't necessarily have boundaries, and because I was able to put myself in somebody else's situation, I found myself unknowingly giving my energy away, um, being so understanding of someone else's situation that I would adapt to their feeling and their maybe adapt to their ideology, um, which is it that makes sense in the context of why I'm doing this whole podcast thing, and and realizing the controversial social issues, and realizing that I don't have my own informed opinion about these things. I've realized that I've just adapted to whatever ideology was prevalent within my circle, within my group. And having the conversation with my dad earlier, I'm still struggling with exactly what it is I want to do with this podcast. There's this ultimate goal, and for some reason I feel like I keep ignoring it. I felt like the right path forward was to figure out these controversial ideologies, and come to terms and figure out what it is I believe and where I stand on them. And I am, and I will continue to do that. I just don't know if it's proper for me at this point to put it out there. I'll just be honest with you. What I've been looking through the past couple weeks and really going down the rabbit hole and really finding new information and learning new things and really figuring out where I stand and what I believe on the issue is the issue of abortion. And I know that it's such a touchy subject. It's righteous on both sides. This isn't something where, one side is completely inherently wrong and the other side actually has it all figured out. There's profound reasoning on both sides of the argument, and it gets uh, uh, it's very, very convoluted. It's not black and white, and given how I approached my last episode, I realized how contentious I was, and the attitude I have, and that's not what I'm about. That's not what I want to do. And to those who did watch it, I've unpublished them. They're not up there. They're not up for anybody to see at this point. I I struggled with doing that. I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave it up because it's a growing pain. Learn from your mistakes. Allow people to see my process. But when I thought about it a little bit more, I realized that because I was purposely being contentious, and whether it, there's no excuse for it. But because I was had that attitude, I feel like it is divisive, and anybody who would watch it or listen to it, it could be, and it very well is triggering depending on who you are. And that's not what I'm going for. That's not what I want. And part of me feels like I feel like there's a few reasons for it. The first reason that hits me in the face is I did go down the rabbit hole, and I was listening to these conversations that Andrew Tate was having, and I was listening to interviews that people where people were asking him questions. And while there are smart, eye-opening things that he does say, most all of it is comes from a contentious sort of instigation sort of attitude. And there are some things he says that are pretty off the wall and misogynistic. And because I was taking in that information and allowing myself to soak up that sort of energy, I think it seeped in and it came across in my last episode. I also, because of this proclivity for controversy that I have, for being able to see both sides, for having this tendency to get wrapped up in ideologies, I because I and I can't deny the fact that I did learn something about my own personality and psychology that I felt was very um it was very it was good for me. It helped me put into perspective something about myself that I needed to deal with. And because I learned something about myself that gave me new insight from somebody who is so controversial, I adopted this attitude of kind of like, haha, I learned something from somebody who's so controversial. What are you going to do about it? And that was the contentious part of it. That was it. Just honestly, it made me feel gross, made me feel icky, and it just that's not proper. It's not how I want to be. It's not the energy that I want to put out there. And so, on realizing that, and then I was gonna do the new episode today, and I was going to talk about abortion and my conclusions and how I got to it, but it's such a divisive issue. It's so controversial that I don't know how to talk about it in a way that would not trigger anybody. And if I don't know how to have a conversation, and it's not even the conversation. Like, I don't mind having a conversation with somebody. It's completely different. Like, if I had a guest on and we were talking about it, I think it would be a totally different situation. There would be a rapport. There'd be a give and take. There'd be finding out what how you understand it, and coming to terms, and maybe meeting in the middle, and realizing where we have similar crossing ideas about it, how we feel about it, and just being able to have a real live conversation. But because I'm doing this solo right now, it's more of me just expressing these ideas and these thoughts that I've figured out for myself about it. And and because it's such a contentious, controversial idea to talk about, it doesn't seem right if I can't be contested on it. and I want to be contested on it. I've I mean, I've done hours of research, and I've gone down the rabbit hole, several rabbit holes, trails, and I've tried to figure out what's going on. I've tried to figure out like where do I stand on it? Like what do I believe about it? What is it about socially that's going on? And I feel like I've done the proper homework for myself. And if it ever comes up in a conversation, or if it ever comes to a point where I do have somebody on with me to have a conversation where we can go back and forth, I have no problem doing that. It feels it just there's something about it that doesn't feel right, and I don't. The only thing I have to say to that is that because it's such a touchy subject, I don't want to chance I was gonna say being contentious, or it's very difficult to say. It just doesn't feel exactly right, and given the state of realizing it's there's something about being accountable for what I say and being responsible for how I say it. And even when I was figuring this out, and I kept telling myself like come from a place of love, like understand, and I don't have anything against how somebody else believes, or like I understand that it's not a black and white thing, but to put out there exactly how I feel about it now also could change, and without being able to have conversations with other people about it at this point, and that's I think that's maybe that's the sticking point. It's yes, I've come to terms with this issue on my own, but there's something that happens when you can feel somebody else's perspective, and feel it as in be present with them and have a real conversation, and understand where they're coming from, and at that point work through and meet in the middle possibly. And even if you don't meet in the middle, I think there's you can walk away from that conversation truly understanding more about yourself, myself, and where I come from, and understanding have a better understanding about the alternating, or the contending perspective. Um, so moving forward, I don't know if I'm going to talk about these social issues that I have questions about. If somebody wants to have an open conversation with me, and broadcast it and put it on the podcast, I am 100% cool with that. And I really feel like I would enjoy that. Um, but going through these different social issues that I've have questions about, I realize that I've been ignoring. There's this one topic that I've really been ignoring that I really want to do, and for some reason I keep putting it to the side. And that's my own personal story timeline of how I changed my beliefs religiously, spiritually, and it's it's even hard to just explain simply because there is so much content, I feel like, within the sphere of talking about, well, what it is that I believe now, and how I got here, and growing up in the cult, and what that means, and how I relate to it now. And honestly, if I'm being very truthful, those are the conversations that I feel most alive. I feel like I can express ideas within that sphere without being contentious, and it comes more from a place of it comes from more of a heart space than talking about social issues. I think social issues are just, while they might come from a morality space, a feeling space, there's too much divisiveness within it right now. And it feels better to think about having conversations about spirituality, beliefs, God, metaphysics. And to be quite frank with you, that's the whole abortion topic, and all of and doing all the research and going down the rabbit trails this past 2 weeks. Really, I just came to a spiritually minded perspective on the whole thing. I couldn't even dissect some of the technical arguments. And then once I got into the technical arguments, it completely shifted my mentality and my idea about how I think about it. And so, yeah, understanding that, realizing that in this moment, I don't know why. And it doesn't quite matter right now, but I don't know why I've been ignoring it. I I geek out on religions, spirituality, metaphysics, all that jazz. And it makes me feel good. And in that atmosphere, within that context, it's far easier for me to come from a place of love and understanding, because from my perspective, it doesn't actually matter what religion you are. It doesn't matter so much what God you believe in. I've come to terms and to understand that there's an overarching um, concept in which we all live life that is void of any particular one God, dogmatism in one religion. And you don't even have to be religious to have a belief in God or a higher power, a higher being. And so, and it starts to get trippy. I totally 100% geek out on all of it. And you know what? Talking this out right now, I'm realizing that that's what I want to do. That's what I need to do. It's what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know why. Maybe there's some kind of, you know what? Who is it? It's Marianne Williamson has a quote, and I'm gonna botch it, but she says something on the lines of, "It's not our darkness that people are most afraid of. We're most afraid of the brightest part of ourselves. We're afraid of our light." And I think it's because that we are so used to, we've grown accustomed to those baseline energies that keep us in the low vibrations. Because anything new in life, just a new job, a new relationship, just anything new is scary. It's new. It's because it's new. It's expansive. You're learning something new about yourself, and it's because it's new. It's unexplored territory. There's the unknown of it. You know, we tend to revert back to things that we know, and we can get stuck in a vibratory state that doesn't foster growth and elevate us. Yeah. And that saying that out loud makes me even realize even more that going down the rabbit hole and geeking out on religion, spirituality, metaphysics is what I want to do, because when it comes down to it, and the even with like the perspective that I wanted to come at these social issues is one of love and respect, and it's the idea that we can be spiritual and religious and believe in a higher power and pursue life in a context of a greater good, that we find an elevated sense of who we are, and we progress in our self actualization, and we pay attention to our thoughts, we pay attention to our feelings, and and question what they mean, and by paying attention to who we are and what's going on with ourselves, we can work with that energy and be better than we were the day before. And when it comes down to it, that's really what I'm always striving for. That's why I've started this podcast. It's to figure out parts of me that are essentially hidden, and figure out a way to be better than I was the day before. So, yeah. Well, shit, y'all. Thanks for listening to that. I really needed that. And that gives me a newfound feeling. Man, when I tell you I felt like absolute crap yesterday, and I couldn't figure out why, and then I realized all this bullshit attitude I had. I was getting pulled down with it, really was. But talking this out with you right now, I I have a whole new perspective here, and I've accepted my responsibility in doing what it is that I know I want to need to do. So it's gonna get weird. I promise you, it's gonna get real fucking weird in a cool way, in a good way. I mean, it's like like, I'm not even gonna try to explain it, but have a funny feeling that I've got content to work through for days. I love talking about different religions and figuring out what people believe, and God perspective, and sacred geometry, and mystic schools, and the secret schools of and magic. And I'm already tripping you out a little bit and showing you how weird my brain is. So there you have it. Thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for listening. Whew, I really needed to talk. I really needed to talk that out. And again, I'm sorry for being an ass on my last episode. Again, I've taken them down because I don't. It was the idea that it was contentious and divisive, and that I don't want that energy out there. I want an energy of inclusiveness, of lightness, and that's what I want to put forward. So, thank you again for being here. Thank you for listening to Cult Kid podcast. I'm not really having a conversation with myself. I'm talking to you. I need another sign off line. We'll figure it out. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate it. I'm Durs. Till next time. C'est la vie.